Hi, this is Pastor Jeff. I'd like to welcome you to the final episode of the book of Revelation without the exaggeration. Today, I'm going to give a summary of the entire book of Revelation that will help you, I hope, understand it, and you won't be as intimidated by the book and all of its imagery and all the things that people find hard to understand. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the big picture, and the big picture is revealed in Revelation 1:19, where we're given an outline of the book and how John's going to approach this. And John is told in Revelation 1:19 by the risen Lord Jesus, therefore write the things which you have seen, the things which are now, and the things that will take place after these things. So, in Revelation 1, John writes about the things that he has seen, the past, when the vision originally came to him. In Revelation 2 and 3, he starts writing about the things that are now. We are presently in that phase of the book of Revelation. We are still in the things that are now. We are still in the time of the churches. We are still in the church age. The church age is from Pentecost, which is the birthday of the church, to the rapture when the church is taken from the earth for the tribulation to begin. So Revelation 1, that's the past, what John has seen. Revelations 2 and 3 are the things of the churches. Revelation 4 is the things that will take place after these things. So this discusses what happens from the rapture to the very end, the new heavens and the new earth. Now, if you just want to read the book of Revelation and find out what is it that happens in the tribulation, the parts of the book of Revelation that are in chronological order would look something like this. So in chapter 4, you have the rapture of the church and the church saints described in heaven as the 24 elders. In chapter 5, you have this scroll with 7 seals, and then the seals are going to be opened, which they start opening the seals in chapter 6. And then in chapter 8, you skip over chapter 7. In chapter 8, there is the 7th seal open. And when the 7th seal is open, that starts the trumpet judgments. And then chapter 8 reveals the first 4 trumpet judgments. Then you get to chapter 9. And so you have the 5th and 6th trumpets that are sounded in that chapter. And the 5th and 6th trumpets are also described as woes. So the 5th trumpet is the first woe. The 6th trumpet is the second woe. Then you jump ahead to chapter 11 and go down to verse 15 and through verse 19. And then that's when the 7th trumpet sounds and you have the third woe. And then you have chapter 16, verses 1 to 12, and verses 17 to 21. That's when the 7 bowls of wrath are poured out upon the earth. And then chapter 19 talks about the second coming of Christ and the marriage supper of the Lamb. So if you just wanted to read the part of the book of Revelation that had to do with what happens during the tribulation, you'd read chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6, you'd jump ahead to chapter 8, you'd read chapter 8, chapter 9, you'd skip over chapter 10, most of chapter 11, and you'd start in chapter 11, verse 15 through 19. Then you would read chapter 16, you'd skip over 12, 13, 14, and 15, go to chapter 16, verses 1 through 12. Then there's a little interlude. Doesn't advance the chronology. Then you get to verses 17 to 21. This all describes the 7 bowls of wrath poured out upon the earth. Then you get to chapter 19, which is when the Lord returns. So that's if you just want to understand the chronology of when all this stuff happens and what happens when these trumpets are blown and the bowls are poured. Now, in view of what I just said, you have to understand that in the book of Revelation, there are what we call interlude sections. And interludes are where the chronological sequence is interrupted to give us more specific information or details about something else that has either happened or is going to happen. So the first interlude section is in chapter 7. Now, in chapter 6, at the end of it, the kings and the people of the earth ask, who can stand against the wrath of the Lamb? Chapter 7 is an interlude because it answers the question of the kings and the peoples of the earth. And the answer as to who can stand is the 144,000 Jewish missionaries can stand on the earth, and the tribulation martyrs will be able to stand in heaven. So neither one of those will face the wrath of the Lamb. Then the next interlude is in chapter 10, where we're told about this angel who stands with one foot on the land and one foot in the sea, and he has a little scroll. And then in chapter 11, verses 1 through 14, we're told about the two witnesses. And we think the two witnesses probably are ministering during the first half of the tribulation, but it's not specifically stated when they're active. Then we get to chapters 12 through 15 is the next interlude. And here we're simply introduced to the cast of characters of the people involved in the tribulation period. And we also get to a fast forward to victory at the end. And they talk about harvesting the earth. So some people are harvested, and those are the Lord's. And then other people are just trampled in the winepress of God's wrath. Then you get to Revelation 16, verses 13 and 16. And there we're told about 3 frog spirits that go out to deceive the nations. And then chapter 17 and 18 deal with chapter 17 is religious Babylon falls. Then chapter 18 is commercial or political Babylon falls. So there is the interludes that you find. They don't advance the story chronologically. They just simply give you more information. So that's chapter 7, chapter 10, chapter 11, verses 1 through 14, because at verse 15, it does pick back up with the chronological order. Then chapters 12 through 15, then chapter 16, verses 13 through 16 is an interlude. That's the shortest interlude in the book of Revelation. And then chapter 17 and 18 describe more about the religious system that is going on during the tribulation period and when it falls, and then also about the political commercial fall of Babylon. So again, if you want to read the book of Revelation chronologically, you would read chapters 1 through 6, 8 and 9, 11, verses 15 to 19, Revelation 16, 1 through 12, 17 to 21, and then Revelation 19 to 22. Everything else is an interlude. Then we have the after the tribulation chronology, and there we have in chapter 20, the millennial kingdom is instituted. Satan is bound, and there's a great white throne judgment. Chapter 21 introduces us to the new heavens and the new earth and New Jerusalem. And then in chapter 22, we're told about the river of the water of life and the tree of life. There's a final warning and an invitation to salvation. So that's the big picture overview of the book of Revelation. So now, having given you the big picture, the forest, we'll break down the trees. We'll summarize the trees real quick. So Revelation 1, oh, there you have that. Sorry, if you need to get that, I'll give you a second there to write that down if you want to write that down for how to read the book of Revelation chronologically. And now we'll get into the specifics. So, Revelation 1, John is told to write to the 7 churches in Asia. What he has seen, what is now, what will take place after these things. That chapter just primarily concerns itself with how this vision came to John in the first place. Then again, we get to chapters 2 and 3, and that is the time of the churches, the letters to the churches. So John writes 7 letters to 7 churches in Asia Minor because those churches best represent the types of churches that exist in the world at all times. Some people teach that it's a timeline. So there was an Ephesian church period, then there was a Smyrna church period, and so on and so forth. I don't believe that is what that is doing. I think those churches are in the world somewhere at all times, the church is in existence on this earth. So somewhere out in the world right now, as I'm speaking, there is an Ephesians church, a church that has lost its first love. Somewhere out in the world right now, there is a Smyrna church, a church that is being persecuted. Somewhere out in the world right now, there is a Laodicean church and a Philadelphia church and a Pergamum church. So these churches just represent the types of churches you will find throughout all time in history while the churches are in existence. In each letter to the church, there are promises that are made to all believers. There in the letters to the churches, believers are called overcomers. That is one of John's words that he likes to use to refer to Christians. He calls them overcomers. Now, some of your Bible translations won't say overcomers. They'll say to the one who is victorious, but it's the same thing. So whenever you're reading those letters to the churches and it says something to the overcomers or to the one who are victorious, that is for you. That's not just for the people at that church who were overcomers or who were victorious. That is for you as well. So what I'm saying is that each letter has something in the letter that applies specifically to that particular church that's addressed in the letter, but some of the letter also applies to every believer. And that's why it says in each and every one of those letters, whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to who? The churches. So you are the one who has ears that hears what the Spirit says to the churches. So you're to take all of that information into account. And then in Revelation 4, John is taken up into heaven where he sees a throne room surrounded by 24 elders. And this is the only place in the Bible we're ever told anything about any persons called 24 elders. And we're also told about these 4 living creatures. Now, the key to the identity of the 24 elders is they all have been rewarded. They wear crowns of victory. They wear Stephanos crowns. That's a crown of victory. They sit on thrones and they're dressed in white. Well, the only group that are promised thrones, to be dressed in white, and to have crowns are the overcomers in the letters to the churches. So this is referring to the church. Now, the church is symbolized by the 24 elders because believers are said to be priests. And David in the Old Testament divided the priest into 24 orders. In other words, the 24 orders of the priesthood represented the full number of priests that were serving in the temple. So these 24 elders in heaven represent the full number of the overcomers, or people who were saved during the period of time known as the church age, from Pentecost to the time of the rapture. Then these rather odd creatures are described, and I think the 4 living creatures appear to be a special order of angel that are described in the book of Ezekiel. Then we have chapter 5. In chapter 5, John sees a 7-sealed scroll in the hand of the one on the throne. A 7-sealed scroll is a will or a deed or both. The only one worthy to take the scroll and break the seals is the Lion of Judah. John is told by one of the 24 elders, look at the lion, but when he looks, John doesn't see a lion, he sees the lamb that was slain, because that was John's primary way of knowing Jesus. He knew him primarily as the lamb that was slain. So that's why he sees Jesus as that. The 24 elders and the 4 living creatures then praise the lamb. And so we see here in chapter 5, Jesus is presented both as a lion and as a lamb. And then in Revelation 6, that's where the seals actually start to get broken, and that is the start of the tribulation. Now, I want to talk about the relationship of the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls. There are 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls. And here is the way I think we should understand that. The 7 seals. Let's talk about that first. In any series of 7 seals, 7 trumpets, the 7 bowls, the first 4 in the series are always grouped together. They are always similar. The 5th and the 6th are always different from the first 4, and there's always an interlude between the 6th and 7th in the series. There's always a pause in the action, and we're given additional information about something else, and then the action returns when we're told when the 7th thing is put into play. The 7 bowls are a part of the 7th trumpet, and the 7 trumpets are a part of the 7th seal. So to put this another way, when the 7th seal is broken, this leads to the sounding of the 7 trumpets, and when the 7th trumpet is sounded, that leads to the pouring of the 7 bowls of wrath. So the first seal that is broken is a white horse. These are called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And that is when the Antichrist comes on the scene. The second seal is a red horse. That is war. The third seal is a black horse. That is famine. The fourth horse is a pale green horse, and that represents death. By this time in the tribulation, when that fourth seal is broke, 1/4 of the earth's population will die. Now, those 4 seals are all hold in common that it involves some horsemen, right? So that's how they're similar. But then we get to the 5th seal, there's no more horsemen. Now this is something else. So the 5th and 6th seal are different from the first 4 seals. The 5th seal has to do with the martyrs, people who convert to Christ during the time of the tribulation. Most of them will die in the tribulation. I think most of them will die early in the tribulation. This may seem cruel to you in some way, but it's actually, I think, the mercy of God that they are killed quickly and they don't have to endure whatever else is going on in the tribulation. Then we have the 6th seal, which are cosmic disturbances caused by an earthquake or a volcanic eruption. And then the kings of the earth ask their question, who can stand before the wrath of the Lamb? When the 7th seal is broken, which is broken later, there's an earthquake that leads to the sounding of the 7 trumpets. But the 7th seal isn't broken until Revelation 8. All right, so Revelation 6 just has the first 6 seals. 7th seal is not broken until Revelation 8. When it is broken, we get to the 7 trumpets. And we find the same thing with the 7 trumpets. The first 4 are similar in some way. They all have to do with natural judgments against the natural world. So the first trumpet has things that happen to the land. 1/3 of the trees and plants and grass are destroyed. The second trumpet has to do with the sea. 1/3 of sea life and ships are destroyed. The third trumpet has to do with fresh water. 1/3 of fresh water is made undrinkable. The fourth trumpet has to do with the sky, and the 1/3 of the light from the sun, moon, and stars are dimmed somehow. Then we get to the 5th trumpet, and it's different. And the 5th trumpet is called the first woe, and it involves spiritual torment. See, those other trumpets, land, sea, fresh water, and sky, they didn't involve spiritual torment. They involved physical torment of some kind. But this now involves spiritual torment. We're told that these demons are able to torment men on the earth for 5 months, but they cannot kill. That is the first woe, the 5th trumpet. Then we have the 6th trumpet, which is the second woe. And this now, we have physical torment that includes death, led by 4 demons who can kill and do kill 1/3 of mankind. So 1/4 of mankind is killed at the 4th breaking of the seal, and now at the sixth trumpet, a third of mankind has been killed of what was left. So that means by the time we get here, half of the world's population has died. Then when we get to the seventh trumpet, which is the third woe, that leads to the outpouring of the seven bowls of wrath. All right, so seven bowls of wrath, we find the same thing. The first bowl is poured out on the land, just like the first trumpet had to do with the land, and it results in sores developing on people. Then the second bowl is poured out, and this time, instead of a third, all of sea life is destroyed. The third bowl, now all fresh water is made undrinkable. The fourth bowl is a heat wave, so it involves the sky again. So those things are all natural disasters. Then the fifth bowl has to do with darkness. Just a supernatural darkness comes across the land. The sixth bowl has to do with the Euphrates drying up to make way for war. And then when the seventh bowl is poured out, we have the greatest earthquake ever and 100-pound hailstones. And a lot of people die from that, obviously. Now, Revelation 7 is an interlude. And so in Revelation 7, the interlude answers the question the kings of the earth ask, who can stand? And we're told about the sealing of the 144,000 Jewish missionaries, 12,000 from each tribe. These are the ones who could stand on the earth, and they make it all the way through the tribulation period to the very end. And then we're told about martyrs from every tribe, nation, people, and language. They are those who could stand in heaven. Then Revelation 8, we return back to our chronological order. The seventh seal is broken, and God begins to answer the prayers of the martyrs to avenge them. Again, the first four trumpets are natural catastrophes, as I've already gone over. A third of the trees is vegetation, land burned up by some kind of firestorm. The second trumpet, a third of the sea turns to blood, which means a third of the sea creatures die, a third of the ships destroyed by something that's thrown into the sea. One of the things I want you to realize about the book of Revelation, you don't have to figure out what these things are that cause these things to happen. Like when it talks about wormwood, you don't have to know what wormwood is. You just have to know what wormwood does. And as long as you know what wormwood does, it doesn't matter what it is. Then we have the third trumpet that is sounded. As I told you, a third of the fresh water becomes undrinkable by something called wormwood. Fourth trumpet, the light of the sun, moon, and stars is dimmed by a third. Then we get into Revelation 9, and that's when the next two trumpets are sounded, and those are supernatural catastrophes. The fifth trumpet, again, called the first woe. Demons are released from the abyss to torment men for 5 months. They cannot harm the 144,000. Then the sixth trumpet is sounded. It's also called the second woe. The 4 demons are released, along with the 200 million demonic army of some kind or another, and they kill 1/3 of mankind. And again, as a fourth of mankind has already been killed by the first or the fourth seal being opened, that means half of the world's population is dead at this point. Then Revelation 10 brings us to another interlude. The chronological order is stopped. We're told about this mighty angel who arrives with this little scroll and plants one foot on the land and the other on the sea, which represents the retaking or the reclaiming of the earth. Then something called the seven thunders speak. John is forbidden to write whatever it is that they say. Consequently, we have no idea who they are or what they say, and we should not speculate. There's no reason to. Perhaps only those going through the tribulation will understand this part of the book of Revelation. John is told to eat the little scroll, which is sweet on his lips but bitter in his stomach, symbolizing that the retaking of the earth is both sweet and bitter. It's sweet because it means the second coming of Christ is drawing nigh, but bitter because of everything that precedes it. Then Revelation 11, the interlude continues. John is told to measure the earthly temple and to count the worshipers, but to exclude the outer courts, as they will be trampled on for 42 months, which is 3.5 years. This chapter seems to focus on things that lead up to and things that are happening around the midpoint of the tribulation. The two witnesses are a Moses-like prophet and an Elijah-like prophet who can shut off rain, turn water to blood, and initiate plagues at will. They minister for 1,260 days, which also is 42 months or 3.5 years. At presumably somewhere around the midpoint of the tribulation, the Antichrist successfully kills the two witnesses, puts their bodies on display in Jerusalem for 3.5 days. After the 3.5 days, the Lord returns life to their body, takes them to heaven. They are essentially raptured to the astonishment of their enemies. An earthquake occurs, killing 7,000 people in the city of Jerusalem and destroying 1/10 of the city. Then the seventh trumpet sounds, which is also called the third woe. So we return now to chronological sequence. Now, the trumpet is sounded in this chapter in verses 15 through 19, but we're not told of the effects of the sounding of that trumpet until we get to chapter 16. The temple of heaven is open, and the Ark of the Covenant is seen, symbolizing the final judgments of the earth are about to begin. So the first woe, again, is the fifth trumpet. Second woe is the sixth trumpet. Third woe is the seventh trumpet. Revelation 12, again, this is a long interlude. Interlude continues. Chapter 12, we're given a breakdown of the main cast of characters involved in the end-time events. The first character we're introduced to is a pregnant woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head, symbolizing Israel. The second character we're introduced to is the red dragon, symbolizing the devil, who tries to devour the male child as soon as the woman gives birth. When he is prevented from doing so, he turns his attention to the woman, but God protects her, so the devil turns his attention to what is called her other offspring, non-Jewish believers in the tribulation, and he starts persecuting them. Then we are introduced to the third character, which is the male child of the woman, which is obviously Jesus, whom God rescues and who ascends to heaven. The fourth character is Michael the archangel, who kicks Satan out of heaven to the earth at this point. Revelation 13, the cast of characters continue. The fifth character, the beast from the sea, is the Antichrist, who oversees what I believe is a revived Roman Empire, which is a composite of other world empires, Greek, Medo-Persian, and Babylonian. The beast receives a wound, we're told, to one of his 7 heads. Now, since I think the 7 heads represent world empires, which 5 have fallen, one is still going at John's writing and one is yet to come. The 7 world empires are Egypt, Assyria, Babylonia, Medo-Persia, and Greece. Rome is the 6th. That's in play during the time of John's writing of the book of Revelation. And the 7th head will be that revived Roman Empire during the time of the tribulation. The head that receives the fatal wound, in my opinion, is the 6th head, which is Rome. And what it is telling us is that the Roman Empire is thought to be over and done with, and yet, to the astonishment of the world, the Antichrist raises the Roman Empire sort of from the dust heap of history and is successful in restoring a revived Roman Empire, what many people have tried to do before him unsuccessfully. Then we have the 6th character, the beast from the land, or the false prophet, who forces others to worship the Antichrist, and he sets up some kind of idol which gives the appearance of life. At some point in the tribulation, no one can buy or sell unless they have the mark of the beast. The beast number is said to be 666. This is not explained. There's much speculation about what it is exactly. I don't really know that we need to do it. As I think the beast is a ruler over a revived Roman Empire, I'm partial to the view that the first 6 Roman numerals, the I, the V, the X, the L, the C, and the D, all add up to 666, which I think all it means is that the Antichrist comes out of this revived Rome. Revelation 14, the interlude continues. This chapter concentrates on the victors of the tribulation, the 144,000, the tribulation saints, and the Lamb, whereas chapter 13 kind of focused more on the losers, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. So this is a flash forward to the victory at the second coming. And the victors are the Lamb, the 144,000, and the tribulation saints. They gain victory over Satan during that period of time. John sees the Son of Man also in this chapter with a sickle, and he harvests what is his from the earth. So Jesus says, okay, I'm going to take everything that is mine, and then the angels swing a sickle of judgment over all that remains. And so that is a harvesting of all the unrighteous wicked. The bloodshed that happens during this whole period of time of the tribulation is said to splatter as high as a horse's bridle for a range of 180 to 200 miles around Jerusalem due to the treading of the winepress of God's wrath. Then in Revelation 15, interlude continues. The seven angels with the last seven plagues or the bowls of wrath are introduced in that chapter. In Revelation 16, those bowls begin to be poured out. Interludes are mostly over at this point, just one or two more. The first bowl poured out upon the land, again, first four in a series are always similar, and it results in painful sores. Second bowl is poured out, everything in the sea dies. Third bowl is poured out, all fresh water is made undrinkable. Fourth bowl, there's the intense heat of the sun. Fifth bowl, darkness. Sixth bowl, the Euphrates River is dried up to make way for the battle of Armageddon. Then we have the very briefest of interludes, just a few verses, where three spirits are released to gather armies for the battle of Armageddon, and a final warning is given. Then we're told about the pouring out of the seventh bowl, which is the greatest earthquake ever and results in 100-pound hailstones. All right, then we go to the next chapter, which is chapter 17, which gives us further details about the role of religion in the Antichrist empire. And the city of Babylon is referred to. That's either literally Babylon, as some people think it is. I don't think it is. I think it's spiritually a reference to Rome or maybe Jerusalem during the time of the tribulation. The great prostitute of Babylon is a false religious system that is going on during the tribulation period. Initially, before the Antichrist comes into full power, he needs the false religious system to help him gain power. He uses that false religious system to his political advantage. At the midpoint of the tribulation, the Antichrist no longer needs to share power with anyone. That's when he becomes a total, absolute world dictator, and he tosses this religious system to the side like a horse dumping its rider. And then in Revelation 18, we're given further details about the commercial political fall of Babylon. This happens during the at the end of the tribulation. Chapter 19 tells us about the second coming of Christ. The marriage supper of the Lamb is announced and anticipated. The Lord descends from heaven, makes quick work of the armies of the earth gathered at Armageddon, and the birds make a supper of the dead. And so basically, part of what chapter 19 is doing is contrasting, like you're either going to become a follower of Jesus and you're going to attend the marriage feast of the Lamb. That's one kind of supper. Or you're going to actually be the supper if you remain an unbeliever. And obviously, it's better to attend one supper than the other. Again, the only apparent reason for mentioning the marriage supper of the Lamb here is to contrast it with what is called the Great Supper of God, which again is when men are made to be the supper. Then the Antichrist and the false prophet are thrown into hell. That brings us to Revelation 20. Satan is bound. This is all about the millennial reign of Christ. Begins with Satan being bound for 1,000 years. Believers who survive the tribulation enter the millennial kingdom. So if somebody at some point during the tribulation became a believer, made it all the way to the end, they are allowed into the millennial kingdom, but they enter it as a mortal. Any unbeliever at the second coming of Christ is carried away to their doom and destruction. Now, when mortals enter the millennial kingdom, because they are mortals, they have children and they die. And because they're still mortal, they still pass on to their children a sin nature. And so that's why there are people in the millennial kingdom who, even though they're living in a time of a perfect ruler, of a perfect world, they still rebel because there's still a sin nature in their children. And some of those children will grow up and reject the Lord. In chapter 20, the tribulation saints, and I think it's at that time the Old Testament saints, are resurrected to also enter the millennial kingdom, not as mortals, but as immortals. Church saints have already been resurrected or have received their glorified bodies at the rapture. At the end of the millennial kingdom, Satan is released, and he incites one final rebellion of mankind. This rebellion is easily put down by the Lord. It's just given one, and he caused fire from heaven to consume them. He doesn't even break a sweat. And then Satan is thrown into hell. The great white throne judgment begins. The great white throne judgment is the judgment of the wicked dead. It begins with the resurrection of the wicked dead, and then they're evaluated according to the books, according to what they had done, to determine their level of punishment in hell. That brings us to Revelation 21, which is where we're told about a new heavens and a new earth, and this new Jerusalem, which is our final destination as believers. We're going to live in the new Jerusalem, and it is described as this humongous city with many colors infused with radiant light. It's a beautiful place. And then in Revelation 22, we're told about the river of the water of life, and the tree of life are described. The tree of life bears different fruit each and every month, and apparently fuels and sustains our glorified, resurrected, but still physical bodies. And then a final warning is given and a final invitation to those who read the book. So that, my friends, is what the book of Revelation is all about. I think if you watch this video several times, you'll start to get the sense of how the book flows, what it's about, and hopefully you won't find it to be as confusing as many people find the book to be. Anyway, thank you for watching. I definitely appreciate it. If you're looking for a church, we definitely would invite you to come. We hope to welcome you once you come. Invite you to Dove Creek Bible Church at 2244 Allen Road. Thanks.